to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs and the events of Bakhmut. Well, I don't know. Bakhmut is now in the news. It's a big offensive issued performed by the Russians, and they are putting in resources and manpower into this battle, and they want to conquer Bakhmut. Now, I don't know why. I don't know why this is a big issue. I don't know why Bakhmut is now in the news. Yes, generally, if you look at the military, what's happening on the Ukrainian-Russian front, you will notice there's not much happening actually. There is the usual artillery fire from the Russians onto the Ukrainian forces and vice versa. The Ukrainians are also firing on the Russians. And as I have stated, what I call Andrei Martynov, I was on the record that the Russians are now regrouping, reconsolidating their forces, making major plans, getting their logistics in order, getting the new recruits trained and getting them to the front, and getting the new additional equipment and ammunition to the front. Everybody expects a major offense of the Russians. I'm not so sure that they will do it in the winter now, not because they cannot do it, but I think they don't want to do it. They are quite happy in defending at this stage the defensive lines or the line of contact and play a war of attrition and having a artillery duel. Now, we all know, coming back to Bakhmut, we have heard from Bakhmut now for the last couple of months that the fighting goes on, and it is mainly done by the Wagner group. And I think with the support of a regiment maybe of the Donbass militia, and they have been fighting and trying to conquer Bakhmut. But like all situations in Ukraine, Bakhmut has a lot of smaller cities in front of it, and it is also suburbs. So first they had to conquer all these smaller towns until they get to the Bakhmut so-called city. And now they are at the front, and they now have entered Bakhmut. But again, it depends on which sources you read. If you read pro-Russian sources, then you will find that the Ukrainians are attacking and throwing manpower and equipment into the battle, and they have regrouped a lot of reserves into that area. And they're constantly attacking, and then they come under Russian artillery fire, and the Russians' artillery fire annihilates these troops, and then repels this attack. And then so many Ukrainian soldiers have died, and so many Ukrainian soldiers have died, and so many Ukrainian hardware has been destroyed. But then if you again read on the pro-Ukrainian side or the pro-Western side, then you will find out that the narrative is that the Russians attacked in waves, the Ukrainians defended their position successfully, killed a lot of Russians, destroyed a lot of Russian hardware, and drove the Russians back. Now the question is, who do you really believe? Do you believe the one side or do you believe the other side? And that all depends on what your current view is, because you're going to be biased. But one always has to remember, it takes two to tango. The first one, if the Russians fires with artillery, then the Ukrainians will also use artillery and return that fire. And they will try to hunt each other's artillery pieces until they find it and just destroy it. And that is how the current line of contact is being fought over. It is not a one-side artillery fire only from the Russian side. It's artillery fire, attrition warfare from both of them. Then one also has to ask yourself the simple question is that Bakhmut is under the control of Ukrainians. And who has to advance? The Russians have to advance. the Ukrainians are defending. And it has always been a narrative that Bakhmut is one of the most fortified positions or towns or cities. I'm not sure what is a town and city in Ukraine, but let's call it Bakhmut city. It's one of the most fortified positions. So firstly, why would you attack one of the most fortified positions for the Russians? I don't understand that. And secondly, you're going to go wave against fortified positions, which I still have to see. But I've seen some photographs and videos about Bakhmut, and it has been fairly well destroyed. Well, if you want to compare it to Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria. It has been flattened by the Americans, and I believe so has Bakhmut been done by the Russians. And again, referring back to the narratives of my colleagues, who always refer back to the Second World War, and then I refer back to Stalingrad, and Stalingrad was also pummeled with artillery and fairly well destroyed. Every collapsed building becomes then a fortification on its own, because it provides the defending forces a point of defense and barrier, if you want to call it, or a place to hide behind. So it's not an open field with trenches. It's inside the city, and that is very difficult to defend, to attack. But as I've stated, there is a map available that shows you the locations of all the Ukrainian regiments, divisions, and battalions, and whatever you want to call them. They have a little bit of information on the Russian side, but you can expect that information is very scarce. And all this information has been collected from social media in terms of soldiers that report back or leave a comment or tell their friends and family and so on. And then these messages are collected, and then they can identify more or less where each unit is. And that's how they determine where the Russians ones are. But I don't believe there is so much Russian forces in the Bakhmut area, as has been alleged. And I don't think Bakhmut is the main focus of the current attack. And I believe it's more a prestige, or call it a private war fought by the Wagner group, to show how good they are, what they are made of, and to gain either military or political gains in that respect. But I don't believe from a military point of view Bakhmut is any strategic value for either the Ukrainians or the Russians. But if the enemy attacks you on one point, then naturally you have to defend that point. Otherwise they break through, and then they can either attack your flanks or attack your rear, and that's not a desirable position. So the Ukrainians are forced to reinforce their units in those areas and bring in more troops and hardware. But they are in a defensive position, and that has a huge advantage for them. Now the question again is that, do they sit in their fortifications or in their trenches and then wait for Russian artillery to destroy and kill them? Well, that would be very stupid to do. So I would, maneuver type of war. I would go from one point to another point in order to never have a fixed location for the Russian artillery to bombard with. So that is at least some common sense type of technique or tactic that you can employ. Another one is like you have a minimum amount of troops in certain positions that are more your front observation points, and you have your forces in the rear out of artillery range. And as soon as there might be a infantry attack from the enemy, like in this case the Russians, then you quickly bring in your forces into the defensive positions, and then you repel the Russian attack. And a third option is you could do what the Chechens have done, and that is a tactic that has been written up, what they have done, in order to avoid Russian artillery they would actually move forward, quickly forward, and engage to such a point or such a distance from the attacking Russian forces that the Russians cannot use their artillery, and then basically repel them with normal small gun fire and mortars, short range mortars, like the 60 millimeters and so forth. And while the mortars are in any case more accurately than big guns, the further you fire, the less accurately they get. And mortars can have a very small standoff distance. So you can use that, and you can even use your under rifle American style 40 millimeter grenade launchers, which are also effective. And then you have your RPGs, and you have some high explosive anti-tank weapons that are not used for tanks but for fortified positions and so on and so on. And well, basically you have infantry versus infantry fighting situation. Yes, there are reports that the Ukrainian hospitals are full of wounded people. Well, I'm sure it's the same on the Russian side. I mean, people get wounded, people get injured. That's war. And I know there is one report from a Ukrainian commander that said that he has lost about 70% of his forces. And well, if I was a Ukrainian commander, I would have put that commander against the wall and shot him. Because I don't understand how you can lose 70% of your force just like that. Then you are a stupid commander, and you actually commit yourself suicide. I mean, you are totally incapable of doing it. But on the other hand, if you want to spread fake news and confuse the enemy, in this case the Russians, and try to indicate that they are more successful than what they are, then by all means, then you can make these numbers. But again, it is common practice from the pro-Russian narratives that they ignore Western media and reports as propaganda and fake news. But if the narrative or the news suits their narrative, then they want to believe it and push it as non-fake news, as the truth. And unfortunately, that doesn't work that way. You either believe a person or you don't believe a person. And if you do want to believe him, then you put call it a factor of credibility to that type of information. And in this case, it would be a very low credibility factor. So you could have rejected, or you're going to nearly reject that type of information. Then there are also stories about trenches that are filled with water and ice and so. Well, it is winter and mud. Sorry, so water and mud. Well, it is winter, and I thought water freezes in winter. And the ground freezes in winter, and it is December, and sometimes I see videos and so on of trenches, and I don't see any mud or any water or any rain or any snow. So again, it's very confusing, and one has to be very careful in what one would like to believe. But let's have a quick look at if there's any truth in the strategic value of Bakhmut. Now, the common narrative is that it is a hub for railway lines, and it is also a cross point for a lot of main roads. So let me show you a map. This is a railway map of Ukraine, and here's it's unfortunately in Russian, but the lowest green point that's probably Donetsk city. And if you go a little bit higher, then you will find on the right hand side a cross and a red dot, and that is Bakhmut, and that is Bakhmut. And if you go a little bit to the north and northwest, you will find looks something like Izium. That's more or less how you can orientate yourself on the map. Now, as you can see, there are red crosses and dots, and that means that that railway has been broken. It is not a continuous railway, so it cannot really be used unless you repair the railway. There where you have the green dot and the mark, right mark, I don't know what you call in English. Those are the railway line is still a continuous line, and basically the wagons can travel over that piece. But in the region of Bakhmut, most of the railways have been destroyed and they are not therefore usable. But everything can be repaired. But if I was a Ukrainian and I had to retreat from that area, then I will blow every single railway bridge that I can get my hands on. I will blow it up. And it won't hurt the Ukrainians because most of the stuff is still, of those green marks on the right-hand side, is still in the Donbass republics or oblast borders. So even if they lose the Donetsk oblast, then they haven't destroyed anything of their own country. So just as I like to kill, the Ukrainians like to kill civilians in that area because they believe those are part of the rebels. I don't think they have any qualm in destroying any of those bridges. And then one has to ask yourself on why is a network so important, a railway network, if it's in any case destroyed and you can't use it. And remember also railways are sometimes far away from any contact point. So it still has to be traveled either by trucks or by the tanks or APCs itself. And here we have now, again, a road network. These are the main roads, which means basically the highways. And, well, there's Donetsk city clearly shown. And then there's Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And just right of that, there's like a crossing. And that is probably a good indication where Bakhmut is. Now, yes, it is a crossing. But just remember, these are highways. These are not second-tier roads, which I will come just now. So highways are nice to drive. And you can have a lot of trucks that go over there. And they can carry heavy traffic and so on. But you can then bring it near to wherever you want it by using the highway. And then at the end of the day, you have to get off the highway and then use the side roads. Now here's a map of Google, which shows you a lot more roads, the yellow lines. And again, you can clearly see Donetsk city, and you can see clearly where is Bakhmut, as it states there, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. So you can see again, position yourself, more or less where it is and how the roads go. Again, these are the main roads, probably about second tier. So it's not impossible to attack the city or to move troops out of the city and into the city again at a fairly well speed. It's typical, you don't have to leave the city as a whole. You can just leave the buildings. It depends on where the Russian artillery are firing. And you can quickly move up to position and defend it. Like I said, it's the mobile type of warfare. Also, like I said, all these open fields, usually the farmers have to get to the open fields, and thereby they have gravel roads, which can be traveled. It's not that they're going to turn into mud. The farmers usually prepare for that. So some of the farms' roads can be traveled. And if I remember correctly, even if it's mud, it's now December, it's fairly far advanced in December, there should have been some ground, should have been frosted, so artillery pieces can, or tanks can cross the open spaces. But then again, do the Russians want to do it? And I don't think so, because they are becoming in targets. So all in all, I don't see the strategic value in Bakhmut. The general narrative is in years, then they can move to Kramatorsk and to the north, and then they can move from the same point to the south. But, well, you could take another point. You can also get to Kramatorsk. You can go from the north and then move like via Lima and Izium, and then get to Sverdlovsk and of what's the other place name? But in any case, get to Kramatorsk, and then you can decide whether you're going to attack Kharkov or you want to move south. And if you want to go to the south of Bakhmut, then there are smaller towns that you can progress. You can still get to the highways and to the road network. So, no, for me, it has no military strategic value. And I don't think the Russians even consider that. But they are supporting the Wagner Group, and the Wagner Group has been fighting this area for the last 4 or 5 months. So, might as well continue, and they do make some progress, although it's very small. And if it's true, then might consider it as progress, but who of us really knows what's happening there? It's not a major gain at this stage. What I would have rather believed that the Russians are doing is they are consolidating their forces, making huge strategic military planning, and getting the logistics in place, and getting the men trained, the reserves, and getting them to the front, and basically prepare for the next offensive. But that's also a big question. Again, a Russian pro-Russian narrative is that time is on the Russian side. They have the time and the clocks, and they will determine what is happening. And they are waiting for the Western economies to collapse, etc., etc. And the Ukrainians are running out of ammo, etc., etc. And it's all in favor of Russia. And again, I cannot support that. I don't believe that. And I will make a separate video regarding those issues shortly. So look out for that. That's not going to be on a topic of why I disagree. It will be an alternative view. That is the playlist if you want to follow that. So basically, I don't believe Bakhmut is a big issue. It doesn't warrant the amount of news coverage it gets and attention it gets from reporters and commentators. So in effect, I would consider that as a semi-non-event. It is an event, but not that prominent. And would the Wagner Group finally succeed? Yes, I believe they will succeed. Is it the proper meat grinder? No, I don't believe it's a meat grinder. And if any Ukrainian commander loses a lot of troops in this area, then that commander should be put against the wall and shot. Because there is no need for doing this. And just remember, the Ukrainians also have artillery, and they're also firing back. And Ukrainian soldiers, Russian soldiers are also dying. Don't ever forget that. And the Russian commanders and soldiers are not superhuman beings. And the Ukrainians are dumb. No, they have the same, more or less, people on both sides of the conflict. Are they not supposed to be brothers? Or family? Or is the one family member now less intelligent and capable than the other family member? No. So don't ever forget that. In any case, I always thought that the priority should have been for the Russian forces to liberate and isolate Donetsk from any military attack, artillery attack from the Ukrainians. Because at the end of the day, civilian people are incapable of defending themselves, and they are the innocent victim. And that should always be a priority. What is that? The army should protect the civilians. That is what the army is supposed to be doing. They are defending the fatherland. And what does that mean? Defending the civilian population. So if I was the Russians, I would have concentrated on that, but I don't see that much action. But I do see some action on the western side of Donetsk. And hopefully the Russians will progress there. But again, Bakhmut, not a big event. In any case, that's my story for today. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the channel, spread the word, tell your friends. Press the bell button to be notified of the next video. And until next time, cheers.